So let's introduce you guys to some concepts, yeah? So first things first, there's going to be an open note test about this little one on Friday, right? So take good notes. We'll go into more depth on these concepts later days, but right now, let's just get to some vocabulary and orientation to the basic ideas, starting with what the hell's the interwar period? So, the interwar period. You might have guessed from your knowledge of general English that inter means between and war means war. Now then, people at the time, of course, did not call it this. They did not know the World War was going to have a sequel at all. And this specific time period was marked by many crises and a lot of turmoil, right? And this is because the 1920s was an era of extreme contradiction. Yeah, I made you this whole diagram of what went down. So let's talk about it, yeah? Okay, so on the one hand, there's prosperity and cultural advancement. But on the other hand, there's intense social unrest and reaction. But there's also urbanism and modernism, and women are getting into the workforce more and more. But then there's like prohibition, alcohol prohibition, and nativism, a particular kind of racism, right? But then there's like sexual liberation, like dating becomes like a common thing that young people do outside of the purview of their parents. But then there's religious fundamentalism and eugenics. Yikes. So the 20s is this like crossroad in between innovation and tradition. And because of that, it's this just time of cultural unrest and extreme divisions in Western culture. So let's talk about that Great Depression, shall we? Yeah. So you guys might have heard of the Great Depression. Right, this all starts in 1929 when the stock market crashes. When the crash market stops. All right, it is known as the most severe economic crisis in the history of capitalism. Right, it began as this normal recession in the United States, but because cash was still on the gold standard, that very specific link made it so that when gold tanked, it tanked all of the currency worldwide. And there was also this just lack of regulation anyway that made it so that the stock market would just fluctuate wildly, which right now, when I'm talking about wild fluctuations, I want you to just fully think about how volatile the crypto market is because it's fully unregulated. And so US GDP falls like about 13%. That's gross domestic product. It's a count up everything that everybody makes in an economy, and that's what that is, from 1930 to 1933. Right? So, in Germany and the US, factory production was 47% below 1929 levels. And this was pretty everywhere. Like, the picture that I'm like talking to you on top of, this is downtown Seattle, my friends. This is the Hooverville that existed just south of the docks. You can actually see Smith Tower up there in the top right. Yeah, so real output and prices fell 33%, which is known as mass deflation. Basically, when prices tank that much, you can't sell stuff for like enough money to get by, and so a lot of businesses just... All right, so that happened, and unemployment exceeds 20% at its height. Yeah, 20% is a bit insane, and because of that, many people lived in shanty towns, such as this one. Yeah. All right, so next thing. In the tumult, though, many ideas, in fact, the ideas that we're going to study, got a foothold or changed to fit this new era. Those ideas are, and I'll come back to them in depth if you don't get the list, authoritarianism, capitalism, fascism, democracy, feminism, communism, and, of course, socialism. Cool. So let's start making our way down the list, shall we? It's really weird to talk from like the authoritarian pulpit, gotta say. Okay, so authoritarianism is a government characterized by the rejection of political plurality, which just means like multiple points of view. Like all opposition to the central power must be crushed. Like that's an authoritarianism. So Authoritarianism is also marked by strong central powers, and they exist just to preserve the status quo, is how it is, right? In authoritarianism, powerful people are also completely above the law. They just don't apply to them. And the separation of powers, right? Like courts are separate from like the executive branch, all of that just erodes, right? And the last hallmark, suppression of democratic voting, right? You ever wonder why like dictators somehow get 98% of the vote? Yeah, that's how, my friends, is how. All right, next up is fascism. I have built you a helpful diagram. All right, so fascism is a far-right authoritarian ultra-nationalism. We talked about this a little bit before, but fascism is usually led by a dictator, obvious reasons, I think. And fascism is also hallmarked by a forceful suppression of the opposition. Under fascism, might equals right. Basically, if you're strong, you are correct. This strength can be physical power or it can be economic power. Fascism emphasizes the nation, right? Usually via race or religion over individual worth. All right, patriotism, nationalism, fascism. It is a spectrum. All right, cool. Let's move on over to capitalism. I won't linger here too long. We've talked about the definition of capitalism before, but just as a reminder, capitalism is an economic and political system. A nation's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit. Capitalism is characterized by periods of boom, like the 20s, and bust, like the Great Depression. It seeks to increase its profits through capital investment. Now then, those periods of boom and bust, well, they can be tempered with regulation and wealth distribution. But in this period, those regulations didn't exist. So, democracy. Hopefully, you have heard of. So, democracy. All right, democracy is a form of government in which people have authority to discuss and decide laws or to choose governing officials to do so. Yeah, so far so good. In before your most annoying uncle, a republic is a type of democracy. I know. All right. So here are the hallmarks of a democracy. Democracies have freedom of assembly, they have freedom of association and freedom of speech. They are characterized by inclusivity. Democracies promote equality of its citizens. The citizen is the most important thing about the country, not like the nation, but yeah, right? Democracy requires the consent of the governed, right? It has therefore voting rights, and it should have freedom from unwarranted deprivation of life or liberty and minority rights. Democracy. All right, feminism. Over here I've got Mae West to help me talk about it. So feminism is the belief in social, economic, and political equality of the genders. Now then, largely, feminism originated in the West, but it manifested worldwide, right? And in this era, feminism, right, was one, in the beginning of it, looking for suffrage. We had a whole unit about it. You guys remember, I hope, right? But after widespread suffrage and many other advancements in the rights of women around the Atlantic, women became just much more visible in the public sphere, including this lady who had a whole career just being a thought on stage. All right, so socialism, second to last idea. So this, by the way, is a campaign flyer for a socialist running for president of the United States. On the socialist ticket and got like 6% or something, like a very high percentage of the vote. So, socialism, just like capitalism, is a political and economic system. In socialism, factories, farms, transportation, banking, and other industries are owned by the community in which they operate. So decisions and regulations are decided by that community democratically, literally voting on what the best thing to do with it is, right? People in that community receive a share of wealth that's generated by whatever industry based on their contribution, whether or not that's financial or their labor. Cool. In socialism, social classes, like, rich, middle class, wealthy, blah, 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 yeah, are diminished, right? They still exist, but they're diminished. And this set of ideas was extremely popular in Europe and in the US in the 20s and 30s. The hotbed, actually, of American socialism used to, no kidding, be Spokane, Washington. No, really, they had a whole bunch of gunfights about it, actually. It's a bit wild. If we have time, I'll tell you all about it. All right, so communism. Bam. This shot here is from a actually very popular communist newspaper from Washington State in like 1926. Talking about, industrial unionization. So, communism. Communism is also a political and economic system. Factories, farms, transportation, banking, and other industries are owned by the state. And that literally means like the bigger government. They're owned directly by the government. So all citizens are then to share equally in the prosperity of those industries based on how much they need. Like Marx famously says, from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. So it's not really based on how much you can contribute. Under communism, individuals still own like their personal property, like this stapler, I guess, but they do not own the means of production, i.e. private property. Remember that one. That one's toothbrush versus factory. It comes up later. Right? Under communism, social class is abolished. Like, fully, it's over. So anyway, here's your reading.